April 1941, Rommel was certain Tobruk would fall within hours. By nightfall, nearly half his prized Panzers lay wrecked in the sand. The official story blames layered artillery for this shock, but hidden among the defenders was a weapon dismissed as obsolete, the 36-pound Boy's anti-tank rifle. If it was useless, why did its presence force Rommel to rethink his entire battlefield approach? The overlooked reality starts here. Rommel's calculations for Tobruk left little room for doubt. The Afrika Korps rolled forward with 38 Panzers supported by Italian armour and the full weight of German tactical doctrine. By evening, 17 of those tanks had been reduced to burning wrecks or left crippled in the sand. The attack, expected to break through in hours, dissolved into confusion and withdrawal. German after-action logs recorded the losses in stark terms, nearly half the armoured spearhead gone in a single day. This was not the outcome planned in Berlin or Tripoli. The German command had expected to punch through an overstretched line, counting on speed and shock to scatter the defenders. Instead, the perimeter held. The official Axis records, compiled in the Afrika Korps War Diary, referenced unexpected resistance and heavy anti-tank fire. No single weapon or tactic was mentioned by name. The numbers, though, spoke for themselves. 17 out of 38 Panzers lost, with supporting Italian tanks and armoured cars, also hit hard. Reports from the 5th Panzer Regiment described vehicles bogged down or immobilised, crews forced to abandon their machines under relentless fire. Recovery teams struggled through the night, dodging artillery and small arms to drag damaged hulls back behind the lines. Among the wrecks, not all damage could be traced to the main anti-tank guns. Some vehicles showed signs of lighter caliber hits, holes punched through vision slits, shattered in wheels and ruptured fuel tanks. Inspection teams noted these patterns, but filed them under the chaos of battle. Australian and British defenders, meanwhile, logged the day's results with a sense of disbelief. The perimeter had held against one of the most feared armoured formations in the world. For the men on the ground, the scale of the German losses was clear. The sand around Tobruk was littered with burnt-out tanks and abandoned equipment, a stark reversal of every expectation the Axis command had brought to the desert that morning. This outcome forced a new question. How had a supposedly outdated defensive system, manned by infantry with weapons already labelled obsolete, managed to inflict such damage? The answer lay not just in the big guns, but in the way every available tool, no matter how outmoded, was woven into the fabric of Tobruk's defence. The loss tally was only the beginning of the story. What mattered next was how those losses happened and what they revealed about the defenders' methods. General Leslie Morshead's defence of Tobruk was built on more than determination. The perimeter was a layered system, each line serving a distinct tactical role. The red line, nearly 30 miles long, formed the outer shell, with barbed wire, mines, and strong points spaced to catch and slow any assault. 2 miles behind, the blue line held reserve battalions ready to plug any breach. Closest to the harbour, the green line protected the garrison's core. Every sector was mapped and assigned. Morshead's orders left no room for retreat. Hold every inch regardless of cost. Night patrols crept into no man's land, updating maps and marking threats. By day, strong points braced for attack, their firing sectors overlapping to cover all approaches. The defence depended on coordination as much as firepower. Within this structure, the Boy's anti-tank rifle found its role, not as a tank destroyer, but as a specialist tool. Each infantry company received several, usually operated by two-man detachments. Their assignment was clear: cover the gaps between the heavier 2-pounder guns and the artillery. The Boys teams watched for armoured cars, Italian tankettes, and the fast vehicles that probed for weaknesses or tried to slip around the flanks. They were not expected to stop Panzers, but to target the lighter vehicles that followed: reconnaissance cars, supply trucks and half-tracks carrying infantry. Perimeter maps show Boys teams positioned at strong points along the red line, tucked behind sandbags or rubble, their arcs of fire overlapping the likely routes for enemy scouts and logistics. The rifle's 23mm penetration at 100 yards was enough to pierce the armour of a German SDKFZ-22 or an Italian L335. When tanks rolled past, Boys detachments waited for the softer targets that always followed: fuel trucks, staff cars or half-tracks loaded with men. The logic was straightforward. Every enemy vehicle stopped at the perimeter weakened the attack, The boy's rifle gave ordinary riflemen the means to disrupt enemy logistics and reconnaissance, forcing Rommel's staff to reconsider the safety of their columns. It wasn't a weapon for headlines, but it filled the gaps in the defensive line, the places where a single armoured car slipping through could unravel a sector. By distributing these rifles across the perimeter, Moorshead ensured every strong point could become an ambush. The defence didn't rely on one weapon, but on the integration of every available tool. The boy's rifle, heavy and awkward, became part of the system that made Tobruk's line more than a barrier. It absorbed shock, hunted for weak spots, and turned the attackers' momentum against them. The story of how this rifle reached Australian hands and why it was created at all began years earlier, far from the desert, in the offices of the British War Office. In the autumn of 1934, the British War Office faced an urgent problem. Tanks were getting bigger, faster and tougher with every passing year. Infantry units, meanwhile, had nothing that could even scratch the armour of these new machines. For the men expected to hold the line, the choice was simple: run or get crushed. The generals wanted more than courage. They wanted a weapon that could give ordinary riflemen a fighting chance. It had to be portable, cheap enough to make by the thousands, and powerful enough to punch through steel. The job landed on the desk of Captain Henry Charles Boys, Assistant Superintendent of Design at the Royal Small Arms Factory Enfield. Boys was a practical engineer, not given to grand theories. His instructions were clear: design a rifle that could stop a tank and do it quickly. The project was classified under the codename Stanchion. Boys and his team pored over blueprints and ballistics tables, studying the latest reports from Poland and elsewhere. The Polish WZ 35 rifle had shown that a large caliber, high-velocity round could defeat armour, at least the kind seen on European battlefields in the early 1930s. Months of trial and error followed. The prototype that emerged was a brute, over 5 feet long, weighing 36 pounds, and firing a .55 caliber round designed for maximum speed and penetration. The recoil was punishing, but Boys insisted on a muzzle brake and padded shoulder rest to spare the shooter. He believed that any weapon meant for the infantry had to be as manageable as possible, even if it meant extra weight. By late 1937, the design was nearly ready for production. Then tragedy struck. On November 7, 1937, just days before the rifle was formally accepted for service, Captain Boys died unexpectedly. He never saw the weapon that would bear his name enter the hands of British soldiers. The War Office honoured his work by naming the rifle after him, and the first production runs began soon after. The Boys anti-tank rifle was born out of desperation and ingenuity, a stopgap solution to a problem that seemed unsolvable at the time. The Boys anti-tank rifle was a technical outlier from the start. Weighing 36 pounds and stretching over 5 feet in length, it demanded a two-man crew just to move and operate. The rifle fired a 0.55-inch armour-piercing round, a cartridge nearly twice the length of a standard .303 rifle bullet. The original Mark I model launched a 60-gram projectile at a muzzle velocity of 747 meters per second. This combination of mass and speed translated into raw force on impact, enough to punch through 23 millimeters of armor plate at a distance of 100 yards. At 500 yards, penetration dropped to 19 millimeters, still enough to threaten the sides and rear of many early war vehicles. The Mark II, introduced in December 1939, refined the formula. Engineers reduced the projectile weight to 47 grams and increased the muzzle velocity to 884 meters per second. This adjustment improved accuracy and extended the rifle's effective range, especially against moving targets. Later experiments with tungsten, cord ammunition aimed to boost performance even further, but standard issue rounds remained the norm throughout most of the war. The rifle's design reflected the realities of its intended role. Its length, 63.5 inches, was necessary for the long barrel, which maximised velocity and stabilised the heavy bullet. A prominent muzzle brake channeled gases sideways to tame the brutal recoil, while a thickly padded shoulder rest absorbed some of the shock. The 5-round magazine mounted on top fed rounds into a bolt-action mechanism simple enough to withstand sand, mud, and rough handling. Sights were offset to the left, allowing the shooter to keep a low profile behind cover. Testing data from the late 1930s documented its performance across a range of targets, including steel plate, concrete, and sandbags. The rifle could penetrate 355mm of concrete or 254mm of packed sandbags at close range, making it useful against fortified positions as well as vehicles. Rate of fire in skilled hands reached 10 aim shots per minute, though the physical toll on the shooter was considerable. By the time production ramped up over 62,000 units by 1943, the boy's rifle was already approaching the limits of what a man could realistically carry and fire. Its specifications were a direct response to the armour threats of the previous decade. The numbers, impressive on paper, would soon collide with a new generation of tanks and the harsh judgments of the battlefield. By the spring of 1940, the boy's rifle's reputation was already unravelling at the sharp end of the war. In the fields and villages of France, British infantrymen learned the limits of their new weapon the hard way. One sergeant from the King's Royal Rifle Corps found himself face to face with a Panzer III outside a shattered farmhouse. The tank's armour, 50mm thick across the front, presented a wall of steel no rifle round could hope to breach. At a distance of just 50 yards, he braced, squeezed the trigger, and watched the heavy bullets strike home. The result was almost comical. A puff of dust, a smear of chipped paint, and the tank rolling forward, utterly unfazed. The sergeant did not try a second shot. He left the rifle where it lay and melted back into the rubble. The story spread through the ranks, passed from squad to squad, growing in detail with every retelling. The boy's, men said, was a weapon for a different war, a relic, not a remedy. Diaries from France and the Low Countries captured the sense of mounting frustration. Against the latest German armour, the rifle was little more than dead weight. Official reports tried to boost morale, but the men on the ground had already made up their minds. They watched as Panzer III and Panzer IV shrugged off hit after hit, their 50mm plates impervious to the best the British could muster. The rifle's size and recoil only added insult to injury, 36 pounds of hope that never delivered. By the time the British Expeditionary Force fell back to Dunkirk, the word was out. The boy's anti-tank rifle was obsolete, and faith in it had collapsed. In the eyes of many who carried it, it had failed its most basic promise. The label stuck, shaping how the weapon was remembered long after the smoke cleared. Yet this verdict missed a crucial detail about the reality of armoured warfare, one that would matter greatly in the deserts of North Africa. The label of obsolescence never accounted for the reality of the desert battlefield. Axis armoured columns in North Africa were not made up solely of thick-skinned Panzers. Nearly half of Rommel's available armour came from Italian units, vehicles like the L333 and L335 tankettes, with side armour as thin as 6mm. These tankettes, along with the Italian M1340, were vulnerable at the flanks, where the boy's rifle's .55 caliber round 13.9mm could punch through at combat ranges. German reconnaissance relied on SDKFZ 222 armoured cars protected by just 8mm of armour plate. Every supply convoy, every ammunition truck, every fuel carrier that trailed the main advance presented an exposed target. The rifle's penetration of 23mm at 100 yards was more than enough to rupture an engine block or ignite a petrol tank on these lighter vehicles. In practice, the battlefield was thick with opportunities. The real measure of the boy's rifle was not its effect against the latest German tanks, but its ability to thin out the vehicles that fed and guided those tanks. By targeting the soft underbelly, Italian armour, reconnaissance cars and logistics, the rifle expanded the infantry's reach far beyond what critics allowed. What looked obsolete on paper became a practical threat to almost every vehicle that kept Rommel's army moving. Across battlefields from Norway to the Pacific, the boy's rifle found its targets where theory said it should have failed. In April 1940 at Tretten, Platoon Sergeant Major John Shepherd of the Leicestershire Regiment faced German armour for the first time. He had never fired the boy's rifle before that morning, but as the tanks advanced, he methodically took aim and fired. 2 German tanks were left disabled on the road, forcing the rest to pull back. The moment was recorded in battalion diaries as one of the earliest British anti-tank successes on the ground. In North Africa, Operation Compass brought another set of surprises. At Tumma East, the 4th and 6th Rajputana rifles and the 1st Northumberland Fusiliers used boys' rifles to destroy 2 Italian M1339 tanks and 6 trucks. the 7th Hussars knocked out 5 CV tankettes in a single action. Private Oz Neal, serving with Australian forces, was credited in unit records with destroying 3 Italian tanks, an outcome few had thought possible given the weapon's reputation. The pattern continued in the Pacific. At Milne Bay in August 1942, Corporal John Francis Patrick O'Brien of the 2nd and 10th Battalion used his boy's rifle against a Japanese Type 95 Heigo tank. The tank, now preserved at the Australian War Memorial, still bears the holes from those armour-piercing rounds. On Makin Island, US Marine raiders borrowed Canadian-made boys' rifles to envisage Japanese seaplanes in the lagoon, setting one ablaze and forcing another to crash. Each of these actions, drawn from unit diaries and official reports, demonstrated the rifle's repeated value against the softer targets that kept enemy armies moving. For the men behind the trigger, the boys' anti-tank rifle was as much a burden as a weapon. Australian troops gave it the nickname Charlie the Bastard, a name earned through bruised shoulders, strained necks, and more than a few detached retinas. The recoil was legendary, and the muzzle blast so fierce that ear protection was mandatory, a rare concession in an era when most soldiers fought without it. Jokes in the ranks claimed that anyone who fired the boys in anger deserved a Victoria Cross just for surviving the experience. Despite its punishing reputation, the rifle was everywhere. By autumn 1943, over 62,000 had left the factories at Birmingham Small Arms in Enfield and at Canadian Long Branch. Each one represented a potential threat to Axis convoys, tankettes, and armoured cars. The scale of this production dwarfed its German counterpart. The Panzerbuchse 39 could penetrate 30mm of armour, but only about 1,400 were ever made before production stopped in late 1941. The boys' rifle, for all its physical cost, multiplied the reach of infantry across every theatre, a distributed deterrent that forced enemy commanders to respect even the smallest strongpoint. Obsolescence is often judged by headlines, not by impact. In 1941, 62,000 boys' rifles meant 62,000 new threats for every Axis convoy, reconnaissance unit, and lightly armoured vehicle. Modern battlefields still hinge on exploiting overlooked vulnerabilities, not just breakthrough technology. The lesson endures. Success favours those who adapt, not those who wait for the perfect weapon. What overlooked tool shapes our defences today?